Gentlemen, today's podcast is with Pete Jackson Main. Now, Pete has been studying and practicing in herbalism and iridology for a number of decades now. He's wonderfully well versed on both topics, but today we looked into the herbalist element of his wonders. What I want to tell you before we get into today's video is exactly what you can learn from what you're looking at today. We looked a great deal into how herbs and plants can be incredibly useful when it comes to improving your mental clarity and getting rid of some of the most annoying parts of life, like that irrational anxiety that you get whenever you approach a woman, for instance. Today's video had quite a lot of emphasis on what plants are useful for aiding certain issues, and Pete had a really interesting frame to put on this, so watch out for that. What I shall say is today's video covers quite a lot of ground, and within that ground there's a bit of conspiracy going on, and that is because within this industry there's a bit of dilly-dallying, there's a bit of funny stuff going on, and you already know that because you know, as someone who watches a channel like this, that conspiracies are sometimes true. I shall leave that purposefully on a cliffhanger as for you to keep watching. What I shall tell you before we get into today's video: there is no video footage today, unfortunately. The cabin, the studio that I'm in, is way too hot to have people in at the moment, so it's just me filming it on my own. What I will say, though, is do not let that take away from the quality of what it is that is in today's video, because there's a tremendous amount. What I shall tell you to do with the video in front of you is stick it on and go for a walk, or do some chores, get something done that you need to do, make something that's not boring, and make something that is boring not boring by looking at this, and just listen to the information, take it in and enjoy it, and put any comments or anything that you have to say in the description. Please do that, but more importantly, enjoy. You've done a wonderful job of making the point there. And with that, as I just have finished my pomegranate herbal tea, I'm going to pivot into what does herbal medicine really mean in this age, because there's so many supplements and things that are sort of hiding behind the name of the herbal medicines, or just generally sort of piggybacking on the positives that can be found here. What does it really mean when you say herbal medicines, and what are their utility? Is their utility, should I say?
Right. I have a lot of very deep thoughts about this. I don't know how far you want to immerse yourself in this subject.
I'm happy to open the can and dive in.
Yeah, okay. So let's dive in then. I think that you talk about, blister packs, pills, extracts, supplements and things like that, many of which of course do contain herbs. I think this is the wrong idea. I think this is trying to cram herbal medicine, and I'll talk about what I think that means in a moment, but it's a very, very big concept, and I think it's trying to cram it into the old mindset of pills for ills. So people have this, when they get ill, they think there's something I can swallow, something I can put down my neck that's going to sort it out, and that's not always necessary. That's the first thing. But the second thing is it commodifies the plants. Now, we are very good at doing this. There's a whole political analysis that I could bring in here, but I'll try and simplify as much as I can. Humans think that they are the dominant species, and they behave like that, and they're busy wrecking things down here for all of us. Humans think they're the most important people on the planet. They can use anything, including each other, in order to get what they want, and that applies to animals, and it also applies to plants. They're there for us to use. It's almost biblical, God put the stuff there so that we could avail ourselves of it. But actually, we're supposed to be, if we are that much more intelligent, we're also supposed to be the custodians of the planet and of those other species as well. My feeling about plants is that they are actually ensouled sentient beings, and that might sound really weird. I have done, however, a lot of experimentation in research into plant spirit medicine, and it is a thing, and it has reality. We have to change our ideas about what the world is a little bit to admit it. But if we start with the idea that plants are here as agents and entities in their own right, and they have a role here, and part of that role is to help us. but we're symbiotic. Actually, we are each other's convivial tools, as one of my colleagues put it. We help them, they help us, and we help them by allowing them to help us. And so the first thing you have to do, or first thing you have to take on if you want to go into herbal medicine, is what is a herb? What is a plant? Does it come in a packet? Well, not naturally, of course. I'm looking out as I'm doing this in the studio at the bottom of our garden here, and as I'm looking out, I'm seeing plants in profusion in my own garden. They're very unregulated. We've completely failed to make a tidy, pristine kind of garden. It's a garden that's decided its own shape, and it's the plants that have done that. We've trodden a path through the middle of it. And I can see, for example, waving at me right now, I can see motherwort. Motherwort's an extraordinary plant. It's a plant that we can use for helping us to relax. The Greeks used to use it to take the anxiety out of childbirth. It's one reason why it's called motherwort. But it's also a heart herb. It's a heart protector. Its Latin name is Leonurus cardiaca, which means obviously has something to do with the heart. So if we find out about plants from that angle, how do they like to grow? How big do they grow? Our motherwort is huge. It's as tall as me. For a plant to grow that tall, it needs the freedom to do so. It can show you what it can do. So for me, I spend time with plants. They are my allies. They're important beings in their own right, and as a herbalist, I know how to prepare and process them in order to harvest their medicinal benefits. But I do that with love and with respect. I don't do it commercially. I do buy commercial products. There are herbalists in this country who have decided not to go into one-to-one practice, which is what I do, or teaching, which is also what I do, but who have decided that their best efforts are put into growing plants and making traditional extracts for us to use as a profession. And I'm really glad those people are there. They are trained herbalists. But I wouldn't buy any plant medicine from somebody who wasn't a trained herbalist. I would only buy it from someone who knew and had a deep feeling for what herbal medicine actually is. Now, another thing we could say about plants is that, in herbal medicines, if you want to call them that, is we are hardwired as a species here on Earth to accept the medicine of plants. We have receptors on every single one of our cells that are sensitive to phytochemicals. Phytochemicals are the chemical constituents of medicinal plants. And that's the way nature has designed us. We're interrelated and interdependent. Yeah. And I think that at the risk of sort of, presented myself as a complete maniac. I've mentioned that I've got a book coming out later this year. I've got another one that I'm writing right now, which is on this very subject. It's about the decommodification of plants and the natural world in general, and learning how to live in harmony with it, and learning how to respect it, rather than simply use it and abuse it. And that, for me, is the most important thing to understand about herbal medicine. It isn't simply a replacement for pharmaceuticals. It's something else, and something that can deliver a huge spiritual benefit as well.
I like that. I think you've sort of danced your way through this minefield very efficiently there, of not sort of totally throwing the baby out with the bathwater, I suppose.
Yeah.
And that's nice. What would you say have been some of the most sort of useful... You did touch on there about herbal teas for sort of expelling yourself of sweat, getting rid of that. Are there any other particular favourites for you when it comes to sort of remedies for certain ailments, or even just general, quality of life? For instance, from my perspective, I've started drinking chamomile tea at night, and that's been very, very helpful for me. I feel like that relaxes me quite a lot. So what's your take there?
It's a classic, chamomile tea. What's not to like? I want to start answering that question by talking a little bit about herbal categories.
Okay.
The way that we see plants in herbal medicine is to sort of categorize them according to what they are likely to do in the body. And that can be a very complex thing, because many of them have more than one action. So if you talk about chamomile, for example, the first thing you know about it, because you're taking it at night, it relaxes you, it helps you sleep, which it does. It's an excellent herb for children for that reason as well. But it also deals with the central nervous system on another level too. It deals with the autonomic responses, in other words, the bits that you don't necessarily have conscious control over. So spasms, for example, it's a great antispasmodic, and that's sticking within its realm of activities within the nerve system, but we can take it further than that. It's also an antiseptic and antimicrobial, and it helps a lot in the digestive tract from that point of view. And sticking with digestion for a moment, chamomile is also what we call a carminative herb, which means that it potentiates the release of digestive fluids from the stomach, the liver, and the pancreas. So in other words, it regulates and improves digestion as well. So you see how one medicine, which everybody thinks, oh, it's a nice relaxing cup of chamomile tea, can do so much for you. And I think the skill and the real kind of art of a herbalist is to know your herbs so well that you can, almost like you could choose a herb to fit a specific profile if you know them well enough, in terms of what any individual patient might need. So I find in my own life, for example, and what you need is very much a function of your own health and what you're experiencing in your health, whether you're prone to digestive problems, whether you're prone to nervous problems. For me, one of the most important categories of herbs is the adaptogens, and I use a lot of these in practice, and I use a lot with myself as well. And this word adaptogen was coined by a Russian scientist in the 1960s. A couple of Russian scientists called Bretman and Dardimov, and they had found that there are some plants that were being used in the Sami up north, in Lapland and the far north Siberia, which had the ability to promote longevity, but also stamina and resilience. And they started experimenting first with troops on detail, on campaign. I think at the end of the Second World War, actually, they found that by chewing some roots, one of the famous plants involved in this was Siberian ginseng, they could actually, those soldiers could march for longer and without being fed. So you can see the kind of mentality that's operating there. But that discovery of what an adaptogen can do has proved immensely useful in the world of herbal medicine, because I think we're under a huge amount of stress at the moment. And the choice of plants that we have available to us to help to relieve stress is truly stunning. And Siberian ginseng is a herb that I regularly use, although in some senses, because it's an exotic, it doesn't grow naturally here. I think we also have to find plants that grow nearer to home that can do the same thing. So, for example, I would choose oat seed or burdock root for that purpose. Borage herb, maybe. Nettle even can be classed as an adaptogen as well. So if you know your plants in the sort of true expanded profile of the plants, you can start expanding your use of them and your knowledgeable use of them. In other words, knowing how to choose plants for any particular. One of the most important things that they can do for me is I'm a very busy person. I don't really rest that much. I do. I've learned over the course of the years that sleep is very important and that downtime is very important. But I maximize waking hours, and in order to do that, I have to have a phenomenal quantity of, amounts of stamina. And I find the plants are what I turn to generate that, and they're very, very effective.
Well, I mean, that sounds exactly like something I think a lot of people, including myself, would love to know about. What do you go for on that front then? What's the most useful sort of herbs for you?
Well, I do go with the exotics, as I call them, the ones that don't necessarily grow here, and I would cite the ginsengs, all of them, including the Siberian one. Astragalus is a herb I use a lot for that purpose. But I'm really because our own herbs, like I've mentioned a few things like burdock and nettle. Dandelion and burdock is an old English combination, reportedly originally discovered by St. Thomas Aquinas. Actually, he was carousing a bit too hard in the monastery one day, and he went out the front door to have a leak, fell over a burdock plant and landed face first in a dandelion plant, and then he sort of got the idea that the presence of these two plants together wasn't accidental, and apocryphally, the story goes, he brewed them up and made the first ever dandelion and burdock. Now you can find that all over the place now. They usually fill it with sugar and present it as a soft drink, but originally it was what we call a tonic, and tonic is another word for an adaptogen, really. A tonic is something which just makes you feel better all round. So I think let's choose the herbs that we can most easily get hold of. Let's choose dandelion and burdock, for example, and then nettle, which I also mentioned, which is a fantastically multi-skilled plant.
What would you do with nettle in which case? That's one that particularly stands out to me, because from my experience of life, it has always been something that I've steered clear from, ironically. So what's the real value with nettle specifically?
It's nutritive, for a start. So a lot of the adaptogens have a nutritive quality to them. They actually impart very, very specific nutrients that we need. So nettle is full of nutrients, particularly minerals, calcium, magnesium, iron. You name it's probably there. But those are the three main ones. It is an alterative, which means that it helps to clean out impurities in the blood. And it does this mainly by stimulating the kidneys to filter out acid residues in the blood. So it alkalizes the system. That's the leaves. If we turn to the root, many of the same virtues as the leaves, but also a few extra ones. It's a good one for looking after the prostate in men. So if you've got any of the problems that gentlemen get when they approach a certain age, kind of with the urinary system, then nettle root is superb for that. And many of the adaptogens, by the way, do a good job with the sort of kidney reproductive area, which is the area we're in there too. And then there's the nettle seed. Now, nettle seed has been shown to regenerate kidney function in cases of chronic degenerative kidney disease. So this is something that the doctors don't admit can be done. They say once you've lost kidney function, that's it. You're either down for dialysis or a kidney transplant. But I've seen patients regain kidney function using nettle seed as a medicine, and that's an archetypical adaptogenic thing, because most of the traditional medicine adaptogens, the ones that we know from Chinese medicine, for example, are actually kidney tonics.
That fascinates me, what you've just said there. I suppose this leads us back into what we were saying of the fact that you're promoted in the direction of what is profitable, not in what is truthful a lot of the time.
Yeah.
That really interests me. I'd like to know, actually, for I'm going to be totally selfish here. I'd like to know what would be most useful for someone who struggles with sort of performance anxiety and just anxiety in general, stress, I suppose. What would you prescribe me?
Let's stick with the locals, and I'd say a wild oat is the best remedy for that. And you can use the oat seed, which is more of a sort of nutritive adaptive. And oat seed is basically porridge, so a lot of us are eating it already. But we have the sort of wild variety tends to have more of the steroidal compounds, which help with stress, and they help to shore up the adrenal glands, for example. But we can also use the flowering tops. They call them milky oats, which are absolutely fantastic for, and actually clinically, there have been lots of clinical trials, actually, standard RCTs, as we call them, the famous randomized double-blinded placebo-controlled trials done on oat tops for treating anxiety, and it's a super powerful medicine. It's as powerful as some of the pharmaceuticals. It scores very well in comparison.
Wow. Well, I have to say, when I was munching down on my porridge, I didn't know that it would be soothing me. It's like the way that it must have been. I think it's something that I think would be good, actually, for us to sort of tie here nicely is herbal medicine. I think a lot of the time, from my experience of what people have said, these sort of topics that have absolute value within them can almost be sort of... I think people can push them a little bit too far out of reach for some. So how can we tie this in a way that... Tell you what, let's go for... Could you provide 3 things that you feel on a day-to-day basis would be particularly useful, just sort of ubiquitously, for people to sort of put into their diets?
There's so much. We're spoiled for choice. 3 things.
You can do more than 3 if it needs to be.
Sorry?
You can do more than 3 if it needs to be.
Well, if you think about, I'm sort of getting creative on this now, Tom. I'm thinking, if we start with what might we need getting up first thing in the morning, something stimulating.
Yeah.
My best shot on that one, cayenne pepper. Now, so it's going to be pretty pokey, and it's going to be too strong for some, but I love that. A lot of people out there doing a lemon juice drink to start themselves off in the morning. Add a pinch of cayenne pepper, or if you can get it, 10 drops of cayenne tincture to that. It's one of the best pick-me-ups there is.
And are we abolishing caffeine with this edition?
Yeah, if you want to replace your coffee shop with that, yeah, absolutely.
Do you drink coffee?
Huh?
Do you drink coffee?
I do, yeah. Coffee Arabica is a herb, and it has its uses.
That's a good point.
So yes, I like it, but I don't do it all the time, and I don't overuse it. But if I'm doing a cleanse, for example, where I'm staying off coffee for obvious reasons, then I'm probably going to be doing a lemon juice thing in the morning of some description, and in that there will be some cayenne or maybe some ginger. Again, very stimulating, heating, but speeds up the circulation. And it just kind of gets you in the mood for doing things.
Right. In which case, let's run with. I'll sort of put the points on the map here. Should we do it in a way of, as you started there, with something in the morning, something sort of just before lunch, after lunch?
Yeah. Good idea.
The
next thing I would recommend is some kind of digestive stimulant, because a lot of people suffer with maldigestion. Some of them have symptoms, others they don't really have symptoms, but we know their digestion isn't working when we look into it, because we find their bowel habits, for example, are a little off kilter, or they may be showing signs of malabsorption. And you don't wake up in the morning and say, I've got dreadful malabsorption today, but it's something that happens slowly as your digestive system sort of fails you over a period of time. So I'm very, very keen on digestive stimulation, and a lot of the time I'll put something into a herbal prescription for somebody to remedy that. So, for example, we could choose chamomile, but I don't want to, put people to sleep in the middle of the day, so let's choose something else. And I would choose maybe a herb. I mean, there's so many to choose from here. They usually have a bitter flavour, so gentian root, or you can actually go out and buy products like Swedish bitters, which have the same effect. So we're looking for the bitter principle, which is something that actually stimulates the digestive powers. It stimulates the stomach to secrete acid, it stimulates the liver to secrete bile, it stimulates the production of pancreatic juices from the pancreas, and it works very much to balance blood sugar, to keep cholesterol in check, to act as an antimicrobial in the digestive tract, to stop you getting, kind of your microbiome going out of balance as well. So bitter herbs, and they also make sure that the food we are eating is fully digested, and that's a really, really important principle. So let's go with gentian root.
And where would we be able to find gentian root? You'd have
to go to a specialist supplier.
Okay.
I don't know. It depends where livers are located. This one, but there are a couple of places. If I'm allowed a quick commercial plug, I could mention, for example, one of my favourite resources, Baldwin's in London, who do an online service, by the way, are wonderful for individual herbs in small quantities. And another one is Starchild in Glastonbury.
Yeah, see, that's where I sort of want to take this as best as we can. I know that we're trying as much as possible to sort of avoid the commercial, because that's inherently the issue here, but I'd like to do it in a way where you can sort of get it.
They're family businesses. They're not on that sort of level of commercialism. And of course, you could always check out our website here, the Natural Centre, and our sine qua non, our condition for taking you on and sending you remedies, we need to know something about you. So we'll have a short conversation with you, but we're very happy to discuss these things with anybody who's interested.
I will plug. I'll put the link in the description so that people can. So, all right, we're on to, where would you put us? I seem to get quite a prolific drop in energy, but by about sort of 2 o'clock, between about 2 and 4. What should I be taking in any capacity here?
Well, this is a sign sign that your digestion isn't working too well.
Okay.
That said, in some countries, they routinely rest at that time of day. They call it a siesta.
Yeah, siesta.
And there's some wisdom in that as well. But given that we don't live in those countries and we have to keep going, this is usually a function of the digestion needing so much energy to digest lunch for you that it puts you to sleep so you can get on with the job. It may also be a function of certain foods, particularly dairy products and grains that contain gluten, can be converted in the body to morphine. They call them gluteomorphines and caseomorphines. And very often, if we're not performing that digestive conversion efficiently, this is part of what happens. It literally is your body making chemicals that make you feel sleepy. But actually, most times this can be sorted out by a bitter tonic taken before lunch to maximise digestion. And, of course, taking care that you're not overeating as well, so that you don't have stuff in your system that you actually can't digest, because that's going to probably put you to sleep as well.
I assume that puts us pretty much at just get rid of the McDonald's, stop the processed food.
Pretty much.
Eat some good stuff.
Yeah.
How does this how does herbal medicine sort of tie in with diet, in which case, when it comes to actually sort of ingestion of food?
Well, absolutely, it does. I mean, all herbalists in this country, to qualify as a herbalist and be registered, you have to have studied a certain minimum basis of nutrition as well. So we take it very seriously, absolutely. However, when it comes to eating plans and advice about eating, it can get very, very confusing. You can get a lot of contradictory ideas out there about what you should and shouldn't eat. And of course, for me, as an iridologist, I come in and say, well, that's down to your individuality. So I can look at your iris and tell you, for example, that you probably shouldn't be eating dairy produce or wheat or something like that. Sometimes we see very obvious signs that suggest sensitivity or intolerance towards certain foods. So that's a useful kind of approach. But then, of course, it's not all about the nutrition. There's a saying in Ayurveda, which is the sort of traditional medicine of India, and they say that if your digestive fire, they liken digestive to a fire, if your digestive fire is strong, then even bad food can sustain you. But if your digestive fire is weak, then even the best food can turn to poison inside you. And I think that's quite a telling little mantra or motto, because it does sort of put the onus on us to make sure that our digestive processes are fit for purpose. And that's why I think my second item in your choice of three has to be some form of digestive stimulant.
Yeah, see, I like what you've said within there as well, of sort of the trial and testing, I suppose, of what works for you and what doesn't. Because as you say, it is horses for courses in many respects, and to that end, having a sort of example of how you can be intimately aware of how you as yourself works on this, I think that's really good. I like that. So with that, we'll move into sort of, we're past siesta time, we're into the evening. What are we looking at here in terms of, is there something that would be useful to take before dinner, or are we going straight for something that's sort of relaxing for the sake of rest?
Well, if you want to use a bit of time, I mean, in this country, for the majority of people, the evening meal is the biggest, and that's the one you're going to struggle to digest most too, because if you eat late particularly, once you lie down and go to sleep, your digestion will pretty much go to sleep as well, and if it doesn't, then it'll probably keep you awake. So it makes sense to use some kind of digestive bitter formulation to help you digest your evening meal as well. After that, of course, it comes the sort of winding down, and again, I think that there's something that operates a lot within busy people, and I've been subject to this myself, I'll freely admit. It's what I call the caffeine alcohol cycle. You can't get up in the morning without 3 cups of coffee, you can't go to sleep without 3 glasses of wine or whatever. And I think breaking that is also kind of important as well. So in other words, if you are one of these people who thinks, well, I've just reached the end of the day, a nice glass of wine, etc. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, mind you, basically, unless there's some particular reason why you should avoid alcohol. But I think it's also nice to realise that there are other ways of relaxing yourself. So as you get ready to sleep and preparing yourself for sleep, and this will be particularly important if you do have trouble sleeping, either going to sleep or staying asleep, or if you suffer from restless sleep, where you're not really feeling recovered and rested in the morning, then something to settle you down over the nighttime hours is also a really good idea. And chamomile, of course, does both. It does the digestion and the relaxing. But there are other herbs that are perhaps more stronger on the relaxing and the sleep front. And one of my favourites of these is passion flower, which is a wonderful, you can take it as a tea or you can take it as an extract, a tincture. I think it's nice to take as a tea. You can blend it with other herbs that are also relaxing and nerve supporting. We have a blend that we call Serenity, i.e. Serenity. See what we did there, which is very, very popular. It has about half a dozen herbs or more in it. Very nice tasting, beautiful, nice, gentle, relaxing let down to the day, sort of soft landing for the day. That's a really good one.
Yeah, and I like what you said there as well. Sort of what I was thinking as you were saying it, that Serenity, is I have noticed, as someone who is pretty prolific in not eating the best of foods, I'm by no means awful on this point, but I tend to opt for the similar cycle to what you said there with the sort of the coffee alcohol. Is I'll be doing work and I think I should probably eat something now, and I don't feel like sort of breaking off enough time to go and make something good, so I'll reach for something quick, which reliably isn't particularly good. And what I have noticed in sort of really paying some attention to how do you actually feel when you do take the time to go for the good thing and reach for something that actually does serve you well, how does that make you feel, and how does that improve what it is you're actually trying to do? And I think one of the things I've noticed this in more eminently than anything at the moment has been nighttime. I've noticed that in being able to sort of wind down with a nice routine that involves something like chamomile has been really good for me. I felt a lot more relaxed as a result of that. And I think that's good. I'm pleased with that.
Brilliant, yeah. I think that when you get... I think I've always been interested in cooking, but I've never perhaps made as much time as I should have for it until recently. And I've started to get interested in producing really good food that tastes good but is also nourishing and satisfying, because I think that there are two things that people err on where food's concerned. One is eating the wrong kind of food, which is easy to sort of pick on, but it's also eating too much. Yeah. And if you have a really satisfying meal, you kind of you don't really need too much. You don't need all of that. You don't necessarily need to gobble up everything in front of you. There are a couple of little important hormones that function in this regard. One is the hunger hormone. It's called ghrelin. It tells you when you're hungry. Everybody recognises that one. There's another one that kicks in a little bit later called leptin, and that's a little bit more subtle in that we quite often miss the signal. We go on eating long after we perhaps should have stopped. Yeah. But if you pay attention, so this is where I bring in the concept of mindful eating, and it's not necessarily on the point of what you were saying, but I'll get back to that in a moment. If you make an intention to eat properly, mindfully, then you get more of an opportunity to check that little signal coming up and saying, right, okay, I think I've had enough now, without being tempted to fill your plate again. So I also like, eating. I'm a foodie. Really, I love food, but I'm less and less tolerant as I go on in life towards bad food, towards stodgy food, towards food that doesn't really have much nutritional value. My body now is quite good at thanking me. I say my body thanks me when I eat the right kind of food, and it's a particular feeling of satisfaction, satiety. I guess the leptin is called the satiety hormone as well. It tells you when you've had enough, and there's a feeling of sort of just integration, that your digestion is now doing what it needs to do. It's a comfortable process. It's a process that's best done whilst relaxing. I have to say that. It's the two portions of the nerve system. There's the fight and flight, but most of us are in the whole time, the sympathetic. But there's also the rest and digest, the parasympathetic, and I think it's important to make space for that. And for me, cooking a good meal and sitting down to eat it, presumably with friends or family, is an important activity. It adds to the quality of life, and therefore it also is a health promoting activity.
Absolutely, yeah. I think you're spot on with that. I think it's one of those things that goes sort of funnily under the radar with this, of just how good it feels to really pay attention to that. I've noticed in myself that I tend to be quite receptive to the feeling of guilt, and as a result of that, not eating poorly and choosing to sort of really carve out some time for myself, I suppose, to take care of myself, has been something that I notice every single time I do or don't make the decision. I think the same thing. I think either I'm glad I've done that, or you don't feel good for doing this, why have you not done it? So goes the cycle. But I like as well what you've put there of the idea of sort of mindfulness being tied into this, because I think that is, essentially that's the cornerstone of everything that we branch out from here, is the point of mindfulness. It is the way that these medicines or these practices or these ways of just sort of checking in with yourself, how they make you feel. And I think that's really important for people to know, that there is there are certain things, this is going to sound very simple, but I think it might be something that isn't actually sort of recognised necessarily enough, is there are some things that will make you feel a lot worse, and there are some things that will make you feel a lot better. And it does seem to be that we opt for the thing that will make us feel worse as a result of being sort of the mirage of it, mate, of us thinking that's exactly what we want. And we don't pay a great deal of attention to the fact that, to the point of everything that you said today, there are a lot of these things that are perfectly within our reach, and if we just reach the hand out and go for them, we will feel much better for doing it.
Absolutely. Very well said. I think there's nothing wrong with simplicity, actually. I would add to that we're sort of back in discussions that we had near the beginning of this talk, which centred around politics, for want of a better word, and that is that some of the habits to reach for certain things are fueled by mighty marketing machines. I mean, you mentioned McDonald's. They are a global corporation who has enough money to batter people through the TV screens with adverts and to present, McDonald's on every high street so that it's an easy option, and it's dirt cheap as well. Yeah. And for a lot of people, that's a very compelling kind of marketing strategy that they very readily fall into. Now, I think I once set foot inside a McDonald's when I was with my sister, who was food intolerant to all sorts of things, and she said the only chips I can eat are McDonald's. How on earth she worked that out, I don't know. And I actually went into a McDonald's with her to get this stuff. I didn't eat any of it. So I tend to stay away from places like that on principle. I think we call them McDonald's in this family. I'm not sure whether you can broadcast that, but
it's going to be broadcasted.
We're in the same territory as it's like the practice of putting all the sugar-laden goods, the sweets, the chocolates, etc., at the checkout. So you just go and check out your supermarket trolley, and you're immediately faced with all these things that if you have one of those right now, you're going to feel a little bit better for half an hour. Do you know what I mean? And so we're kind of coaxed and cajoled and educated into doing the wrong things and making the wrong choices. And I think this is another issue that we have to contend with. Training people to eat better. Now, one of the things I often do with herbal medicine is to say people out there, if they have cravings, sweet cravings in particular, very, very common, and there's a lot of diabetes, latent diabetes, etc. in our population as well. It's actually not that difficult to start pulling people's tastes away from that stuff. And part of the way you do that is, first of all, in herbal medicine, we could talk about this by the use of particular herbs. We can put things into herbs. I mentioned Siberian ginseng, but also we might talk about burdock, which is a very, very common, British wild plant, burdock root, which they use as a vegetable in some parts of the world, but has a very high content of inulin, which is a sugar-like substance that helps to sustain your energy levels but doesn't spike insulin. So it's super valuable in the treatment of blood sugar issues, whether it's hypoglycemia or diabetes, but certainly in regulating the appetite to sort of help us not to rely on unhealthy sugars and unhealthy sweet things, because the sweet taste energetically is really important. It's comforting, it's warming, it's sustaining, it does something for us. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's just that the kind of sweets that are put in front of us are the wrong ones. They're based on refined sugar that will wreck your metabolism, if you carry on doing it in a very short space of time. So that's one thing. And then the other part of it is the bitter. So if you get good digestion, craving sweet things in Chinese medicine is a symptom of spleen qi deficiency, and what that means is that there's not enough energy to run the digestive system. So it's a direct consequence of a malfunctioning digestion or an inefficient digestion. So to optimize digestion by the use of the herbs I was mentioning earlier, the bitter herbs, is one of the most important things you can do to train people to start not to want those unhealthy options.
Yeah, and I think what you're touching on there is probably one of the most eminent problems of society now, is that constant want of the sugar, of the sweet thing in front of us. And as you say, there is, whether people like it or not, there's a tremendous amount of political bearing here. This is profit, and it's money. Where money is concerned, a lot of the time, wholesomeness and goodness as a whole are not. And as you say, this is perfectly clear. You go into any supermarket or any place that sells any of these nefarious, I suppose, products.
Yeah.
It's obvious. You can tell. It's the way I actually just on the point of your McDonald's. I watched an advert a few days ago, as you say, because they're on so consistently, and it was a sausage McMuffin, and there was a very slow pan around the sausage McMuffin with this high definition photo. It looked delectable, it looked lovely, and it says breakfast done properly.
Yeah.
And you think, it's so enticing, and it's so obviously enticing, and you put it with the tagline as well, and of course it comes out and culminates in a desire. And as you say as well, the marketing scheme here of the fact that these things are so cheap, which is quite commonly the case just across bad food in general, it's all pretty cheap.
Yeah, it is.
It's the exploitation of our inherent function. As you say, sugar, or sweetness rather, has its purpose. It's not a inherently bad thing. It is when put in the hands of conglomerates who are infatuated with the progression of their finance.
Yeah. Nicely put.
And with that being said, I have to say I've really enjoyed this conversation. I think it's been fascinating to look into just some stuff that's not commonly put out. I think it's always useful to keep testing that boundary and put stuff out that makes people think. And I think to that end, I couldn't have asked for anyone better to come on and talk about this. You've put your points wonderfully well, and you're just a gem, really. I'm sure you probably understand that you're a very interesting person, and for that I thank you for your company.
I try to be.
you certainly achieve as much.
Well, thank you.
So with that being said, as I say, thank you very much for coming on, and I will.
Well, thank you, Tom. It's been a pleasure.
Good. I'm glad you've enjoyed it, and I will speak to you shortly, sir.
All right.
See you in a bit. Thank you very much.
Bye now.
People, that was Pete Jackson Main, a fucking legend who knows his stuff wonderfully well. And to that end, I hope you have found what we were talking about today valuable, because I certainly did. And though I shall say on camera, because I don't care, I was nervous today, and I've struggled a little bit to get some stuff out. I hope you enjoyed, and we will get more people like Pete on, because guys are fucking mensch. So with that being said, see you in a bit. Wait. Oh, how do I turn the camera off now? Oh yeah, motherfuckers.